All right.
Okay, so I see people are going in. So Samir, I guess whenever you're ready.
Sure. Well, thank you very much. In the interest of time, I'll jump right into this. My name is Samir Mehta, and I am the president of South Asian Bar Association of North America. And we are very happy, very thrilled to see this collaborative effort come forward. Today, we'll be having a presentation on the Afghan resettlement in the United States and how you can help. This has been an incredible effort by many leaders of our Afghan Relief Task Force of Saba North America, working with Saba Foundation. This has been co-sponsored by the South Asian Bar Association of DC, the South Asian Bar Association chapter in Chicago, South Asian Bar Association in San Diego, and Saba Foundation, as well as two partnering organizations, the PARS Equality Center and the Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service, known as LEARS. And I just really excited to see this very important work being done by these organizations. Thank you to all of you who put this on, and I thank you to all of you who are attending. I'm hoping that this will be rewarding and lead you to great opportunities to work on this urgent issue. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ravi. Thank you.
Thank you, Samir, and thank you for your leadership and for Saba North America, as well as the chapter presidents of Saba DC, Saba San Diego, Saba Chicago, and the Saba Foundation for their support to this important event. Before I get any further, a couple of housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded. We specifically intended to make this like a webinar to promulgate for those who are unable to attend the live Zoom today in an effort to encourage participation and assistance to our Afghan allies by attorneys in the Saba network. So just wanted to caveat that. Also wanted to caveat that all of our speakers, to include myself, are speaking in a personal capacity. And while we do have several who are affiliated with various government agencies, to include the Department of Justice, the Department of the Navy, broader Department of Defense, the United States Institute of Peace, amongst others, no views are attributable to said agencies or to the broader United States government. They are solely those of the individual speakers. That being said, I wanted to thank all of you for taking the time to attend today's session, and more importantly, for your interest in helping our Afghan allies. As anyone who's been watching the news knows, that America's national security always moves on, and with recent focus on situation in Ukraine and other critically important areas of the world, one can sort of forget America's longest war, which took place in South Asia, where obviously the majority of us have a close connection. And it is easy to lose sight of those who contributed so mightily to that cause. And I think it's critical to always remember that the sacrifices of the Afghan people whom we are trying to assist is not only humanitarian, but is in direct connection to the service. As someone who had the opportunity to serve in Afghanistan in a military capacity in Laghman province, in Nangarhar province, and Kunar province, I can speak from firsthand experience that the efforts of by one of our speakers today are directly responsible for American service members and civilians coming home alive and coming home to their parents. So while we rightly thank our service members for their service, and I do see several fellow from my Saba military law section here, and we rightly thank them for their service, and Saba North America has been a great proponent of veterans initiatives. I think we should never lose sight and thank the Afghan allies for their service, and there's no better way to serve them than to serve them in their moment of need, brought upon by a variety of issues, and to help. And for those of us who are able to, either through pro bono or other initiatives as attorneys, to use our unique positions to use the term privilege to assist our fellow South Asians whose service was not only humanitarian, but whose service was a direct service to our country, and I think is just pivotal. So thank you all for your participation. To help in this important effort, we are joined by an all-star panel of speakers, ranging from experience as an actual cultural advisor from an Afghan perspective doing this, to humanize this effort, to some great scholars and some incredibly talented attorneys and leaders who are working on this in a variety of ways. And I'm going to be so privileged to introduce them really quickly. And just as another housekeeping note, once we turn this over to the moderator, Manal, please feel free to enter any questions or thoughts or comments into the Q&A on the feature of the Zoom, and our moderator will integrate them as part of the presentation to our esteemed panel. So with that being said, I'd like to start introducing the panel and first thank them for taking the time and for sharing what I'm sure will not only be some incredibly important stories, but some hugely personal ones as well. So with that, I'll start with our first speaker, Mr. Salim Mohammed Hakimi. Salim grew up in Kabul, Afghanistan, and at the age of 13, at his father's encouragement, decided to learn English, and he became an interpreter. He started as a local hire, working for DynCorp and later Blackwater Corporation, training the Afghan National Police on a variety of matters ranging from small unit tactics, marksmanship, high advanced tactical driving, first aid, and officer ethics. He worked in all regions of Afghanistan, working with all groups from Pashtun to Tajik to the Hazara. And he also worked in the Ministry of Interior as a local hire before he, like, as I'm sure many of you are aware with the challenges, received a special immigrant visa and was able to emigrate to the United States in 2008, where he continued his work as a language and cultural advisor, this time in the United States, training U.S. service members on Afghan languages and cultural orientation at the Joint Readiness Training Center at Fort Polk, Louisiana, as well as the U.S. Army's 1st Special Forces Group at Joint Base Lewis McChord in Washington State. He then returned to Afghanistan as a U.S. hire, where he continued to work on a variety with our service members as a language and cultural advisor, to include with provincial reconstruction teams with a focus on the agricultural development. He also spent time at a combat service support hospital in Helmand province during some very sort of contentious and kinetic period there. And then he also served at Fob Gamberi in Lugmont province as a military intelligence mentor, and had the misfortune of working with a then young Army captain myself on a rule of law effort and attending a homicide trial in Afghanistan, and then was specially hand selected to serve as the lead interpreter and cultural advisor to the senior most uniformed lawyers in the Afghan National Army, who came to the United States on a delegation to visit the Army Judge Advocate General, the senior most lawyer in the U.S. Army at the Pentagon. And so and we are really appreciative of him to come and share his uniquely lived experience as someone who has served honorably alongside our forces and has lived the experience of resettling. So we really are appreciative to him, and on a personal note, I'm appreciative of him for all his time and assistance with me as we went out on a variety of missions during our time together in some of the more contentious provinces in eastern Afghanistan during that time. Next, we have an incredible attorney, Seema Alizada, who is the senior immigration attorney with the Afghan Support Project at the PARS Equality Center. She has dedicated her career of over 14 years to support the Middle East and South Asian communities. She has been with PARS since 2015, and where she leads the Afghan effort. She has also worked on issues involving the Muslim ban and providing legal education in the area of the travel ban waiver advocacy. She has recently really taken upon the cause of serving the Afghan community since the fall of Kabul last August. She is fluent in Persian, and she received her JD from the University of UC Hastings Law School in San Francisco, where PARS is based in the Bay Area. And we're really looking forward to her discussion. She will also be sharing some links and things in the chat about the great work that PARS does for Afghans and really to help in a variety of ways with the resettlement issues. Then we have an incredible lawyer and leader in Krish Omara Vignaraja. Krish is the president and CEO of Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services. Prior to her leadership role at what's called LEARS, she previously served in the Obama White House as the policy director for the former First Lady, Michelle Obama, where she led the First Lady, Michelle Obama's signature Let Girls Learn initiative. She also served at the State Department as a senior advisor to both Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and Secretary of State John Kerry There, she coordinated development and implementation of multiple programs, including those concerning refugees and migration, and engagement with religious communities, as well as the legal dimensions of U.S. foreign policy. And she has a lot of interagency experience, having worked with USAID, Health and Human Services, and the Department of Defense. Prior to her federal service, she practiced law at Jenner & Block, and she also clerked on the First Circuit. She has a JD from Yale Law School, as well as her undergraduate degree from Yale College, and has a MPhil in International Relations from Oxford University. And she's also deeply connected to this material from having escaped her own home country, Sri Lanka, who was on the brink of civil war when she and her family emigrated to Maryland. So we're really honored and grateful that she's willing to share great work that her and her team at Lears are doing. And I think hearing her insights from a senior government leader as well will be incredibly insightful. So really grateful to Krish for participating in this. Then we have an incredible scholarly knowledge from Deepali Mukhopadhyay. She's an associate professor in the global policy area at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs at the University of Minnesota, and her research focuses on the relationships between political violence, state building, and governance. And she's currently serving as a senior expert on the Afghanistan peace process for the U.S. Institute of Peace. And she has written several publications on revolutionary politics and Western intervention, to include state building in Afghanistan. Her research has been funded by the Carnegie Corporation, the Eisenhower Institute, as well as the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, as well as the Harvard Law School. She previously was on faculty at Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs, and was a visiting scholar at NYU as well. She has a PhD from the Fletcher School at Tufts and her BA from Yale. So we're fortunate to have several Yale grads here. So thank you to Deepali for her participation in the incredible sort of analytical analysis that she has to this topic. And incredibly fortunate to be moderating this session is Lieutenant Junior Grade Manal Chima, who is currently a first tour judge advocate for Regional Services Office in Western Pacific in Yokosuka, Japan, where she accepted her commission in the United States Navy through the student program in May 2019, and graduated from Officer Development School in Newport, Rhode Island in November of 2021, and is currently at the Naval Justice School. She's from Massachusetts, and she received her bachelor's also from Tufts, so we have a lot of intersectionality there, and majored in political science, and she received her law degree from UVA. She's also a former intern with the DOJ's Counterterrorism Center and the National Security Division, as well as the Office of the Legal Advisor for the State Department. She also was an intern at the Office of the Chief Prosecutor for Military Commissions, where she too had the misfortune of working with a then young, somewhat semi-competent counterterrorism prosecutor and myself. And then probably most impressively in the SABA world, she is a 2019 SABA DC Public Interest Fellow. So a great plug for the great program for law students who might be interested. So, and we're really honored. She's a true, despite her young age, a true scholar on some of the intersectionalities of U.S. national security and South Asian culture and Islamic jurisprudence. So really fortunate to have Manal lead us through this discussion. So with that being said, I just want to thank everyone and thank everyone for participating, and please do share your questions and your thoughts through the Q&A function, so our moderator can integrate them into the presentation. So with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to our moderator now, Lieutenant Junior Grade Chima. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Ravi, for that very kind introduction. I am very honored to be moderating this panel. There are going to be two facets to this, to the way that I've structured this. I'll ask questions of each of the panelists, and then I will elicit questions from you all for them. So please submit any questions you have via the Q&A function, and we will address those, as many as we can, hopefully, before this concludes. So to jump in, the first section of questions I'd like to ask is how each of the panelists got involved. So starting with Salim, can you tell us more about your experience as a language and cultural advisor working with U.S. personnel in Afghanistan?
Hello, everyone. My name is Salim Hakimi. It's been my honor. It's my profound honor knowing Major Rawi and serving with him and Afghanistan, Fab Gambari. I've worked with U.S. military forces for 8 years. Today, I would like to say my personal experience working as a cultural advisor and interpreter supporting U.S. Military mission in Afghanistan. I believe a professional interpreter is like a bridge between two cultures and two different societies who has more in differences compared to things in common. For example, like communication, it's so important to communicate when you are translating for people with two different backgrounds. American way of communication is very easy, which I found in my past 8 years of working with them. For example, they are very direct to the point, and it's so easy to find the main agenda of the meeting. And to them, time is very important, and they will just come direct to the main agenda. And Afghan way of communication, it's a little bit slow coming to the main agenda because they believe building rapport is more important than coming to the main agenda. So they're not very time sensitive, and it can cause confusion for both sides. And also in Afghan culture, they believe that coming direct to the point or to the main meeting agenda can be a little disrespectful, and translating between two cultures with having such a different way of communication can be a tough challenge. And myself was preparing every day, and in my personal experience, I found that emotional intelligence is number one helpful assets to help you in translating, because you want to be a bridge, not a wall, between two different groups of people who want to make that mission successful. But communication is a key element for such a success. And also knowing my native culture was also a big winner in that process. My dad was a retired colonel of Afghan Royal Army. I was asking so many questions about our own native culture and learning on daily basis. And in the meantime, I was asking so many questions from my American co-workers about American culture. So these were some of the stuff that I've learned in my past experience.
Thank you, Salim. So starting with Seema, then going to Dipali, and then Krish. Could each of you tell us more about your background and what inspired you to get involved in the resettlement of Afghans in the United States? Seema, you can start first if you're good with that.
Thank you, Manal. It's kind of unique how I got started, because I am an Iranian American, and my children are first generation. And the way that my career kind of started was that I began many years ago in 2011, immigration clinic for the Middle Eastern communities. And it was very fresh and new at the time. And I had various clients, whether they were Yemeni, Afghan, Iranian, all sorts of different Middle Eastern and South Asian clients that I was serving at the time. And that was in Oakland. And I noticed that there was a great need in the Afghan community about 10 years ago, when I was asked to serve as an immigration attorney at a local, I don't know if many of you know, but Fremont, I'm sure many of you know, is a very big hub. Many Afghan families in Fremont and Newark and Tri-Cities, Hayward. And Afghan Coalition is a nonprofit organization that's based out of Fremont. And I was doing a monthly immigration clinic the last 5 years there. And then prior to that, just serving a lot of Afghan community members. And so so that's kind of how I started. And then obviously with the fall, I just, we stepped up as an organization and started a national program to do humanitarian parole and advise those whose families and acquaintances are in Afghanistan. And then currently we have a new office. So it's just like, this is how it started for me. It was just not like overnight. I started to work with the community. I had already been working with the community, which was really nice because I had a huge passion with the fall. And so like I was emotionally and still am very emotionally invested in the project.
Thank you for sharing that, Seema. Deepali?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me, Manal, and to Ravi for organizing. I was, the summer before my senior year at Yale, was interning in 2001 at the Lawyers Committee for Human Rights, which is now Human Rights First, working on the Afghan refugee crisis, which at the time there were 5 million refugees between Iran and Pakistan, and became committed to the idea of getting to Afghanistan to learn more about it, and then went back to college for my final year, and the events of 9/11 took place. So I made my first trip to Afghanistan in 2004 and have been going back and forth there, working there right until most recently, about 6 weeks before the fall of the government. I was there this summer. So I did my doctoral work there, wrote my first book there, and have built a set of very deep relationships and intellectual and emotional and social commitments there. And as Seema said, it's been an incredibly difficult and exhausting 6 months, but it's very heartening to be part of a conversation that keeps Afghanistan and our Afghan friends and partners on the horizon. So thank you for doing this.
Well, thank you for all your advocacy. Krish?
Yeah, Manal, thank you so much. Wonderful to be with such an esteemed panelist. Excited to learn more than I perhaps can edify, but that's a nice position to be in. So for those of you who aren't familiar with LIRS, we are the largest faith-based nonprofit dedicated exclusively to immigration, working with refugees. We're headquartered in Baltimore, Maryland, and LIRS has kind of a longstanding history working with special immigrant visa recipients, but we were also, intensely involved in the lead up to August. Even during the transition, we had been raising this issue in more of the private conversations we were having with the administration, but candidly, as it felt like we were that our pleas to focus on this issue, to evacuate our allies as we had done in other historical contexts, felt like it wasn't being seriously considered. LIRS became more public in our advocacy starting in April. And so, our focus was to learn from the experience of basically over the last decade, we have resettled about 10,000 Afghan special immigrant visa holders. And then, we knew that the administration had inherited a backlog of about 17,000 SIV applicants, and alongside their families, that was about 88,000. And so our point to the State Department, to the White House, was we can't just address this by tweaks in terms of consular processing. And so that's kind of what began as an advocacy effort. We also knew that to make the case, we needed to show that the refugee resettlement infrastructure was being rebuilt, because I think there was some concerns, understandably, from the government that over the prior administration, the infrastructure had been decimated. And so what we also tried to do was rebuild that capacity. And so LIRS has been, proud of our work with a number of colleagues, I think some of whom are represented here, whether it is nonprofits all across the country, lawyers, volunteers, congregations, veterans groups. We've been kind of working on both the policy and the programmatic sides.
All right, thank you, Krish. So the next set of questions, I'm hoping to tease out some more specific experiences, especially some of the challenges you all have faced, and also the services you all have provided. So starting with Celine, can you describe some of the challenges you faced either with the civ process or after resettling to the United States, either from a cultural adjustment or employment perspective, or even with regard to accessing social benefits?
I arrived to United States through special immigrant visa in October 10, 2008. At that time, I was in my early 20s, and I was facing with quite a few challenges, actually. The very first one was moving from a military hard environment into a civilian, which was the transitioning from military life to civilian. Secondly, I knew only military American culture. I was not very acquainted and familiar with the civilian life in America. And the second was my home culture. I become like homesick for a little over 2 years. So for that period of 2 to 3 years, it was very rough to adjust here in America. And my SIV process, I was very lucky because I was working with a higher leadership of Army National Guard from several different states. The first one I worked with, his name was a Colonel Van McCarty, who is a Major General, the commander of South Carolina National Guard. He was working for Brigadier General Robert Livingston, and he supported my letter of recommendation. SIV program at that time was through a general officer letter recommendation. And then after he redeployed, my process was still in the progress, and Lieutenant Colonel Hang, who is a brigadier general at Nebraska National Guard, he's a land component commander. He knew some people through his personal work relationship in USCIS and immigration. And when he sent emails, it helped out as normal process. My total time of the process and waiting was 6 months.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. Seema, I know, can you describe some of the services you've provided to Afghan clients? I'm sure you've worked with intensively in the civ process.
Yeah, so we were originally in August, we did a lot of humanitarian parole. At this time, what we're doing is providing, and we have two departments, like, so Parsa Quality Center, it's a pretty holistic organization. We have a social services department and a legal department. And so the legal department, which I am a senior immigration attorney at, we do immigration legal services. So right now we're doing a lot. You should see my desk right now. Behind this computer, there's lots of stacks of new arrivals, adjustment applications. And the families are very large. Like, I just had a family today, 10 adjustment applications. They're SIV, they have COM approval, and we're doing their adjustment. For those that are not immigration attorneys, that just means getting their green card, and then we're also doing a ton of familial adjustment applications for those who were in process and they had a family petition, and then Afghanistan fell and they left and were evacuated or port paroled in, and now they have family petitions that never got finished because they were either scouted to have a consular interview, and now we are doing their immigration cases, and our office is doing their adjustments. And then there's many folks who are coming in for asylum consultations to file for affirmative asylum, because as we know, parole, they've come in as port parolees for a period of 2 years, and they can unless the administration comes out with like TPS or a parole program, a general, they are going to be having to either re-parole or adjust status or file for asylum. And right now, locally, I think nationwide, it was very surprising. I found out this week that, or last week, nationwide, there was only 96 applications for asylum that have been filed affirmatively. And then they're in California alone, they expect by September 2022 that there'll be 13,520 new arrivals coming that came off the bases. And so far we have 9,900 that have arrived in California. And so there's only 96 applications affirmatively that have been filed. So you can imagine that there's a lack of resources. And there's a lot of other things we do. I mean, we don't only serve new arrivals, we serve folks that we've served for years, like on the pathway to citizenship. You know, we have folks that have families still in Afghanistan. And really, I just wanted to let everyone know that humanitarian parole is not a dead issue just because you're hearing on the media that they're saying like, oh, they're not getting approved. I really want to put out there the truth. The truth of the matter is we have the USCIS was not organized, and they did not even have, until November, they didn't even issue guidance. So without talking everyone's ears off, I did want to say that parolees, the folks who have come in, they have family members, immediate family members that were disjoined from them, and they need to file for humanitarian parole. And that is a priority for USCIS, as they have noted. And so that's why we need financial sponsors, and we can talk about that later. But humanitarian parole is still needed, and we could talk later if anyone has a question later on about which priority categories USCIS is favoring.
Yeah, thank you, Seema. We're definitely going to go through with all the panelists and discuss ways that all the audience members can help with these important issues. Deepali, can you give us some more information on the lessons learned or challenges you've seen and experienced through your research and advocacy?
Sure. Thanks, Manal, for the question. So I'm not a lawyer, I'm not doing this kind of work in any institutional capacity. So a lot of what I've been doing since August has been just becoming part of informal networks of people initially that were part of the evacuation effort. So veterans and journalists and former aid workers and diplomats and all sorts of folks were just trying to help people get out of the country. And then subsequently, I have been trying to think more broadly about what it means to support our allies and partners. So, you know, Salim has spoken very eloquently about all of those who worked with the US military. And of course, there were a lot of folks who worked with our civilians on the ground as well. But then there were a whole range of other individuals who were journalists and activists and political leaders and professors and poets and artists who were doing work in solidarity with what the Americans were pursuing in Afghanistan. And they have been very much in the bullseye of the Taliban for many years now and continue to be so. And so that is more sort of my network. And so I have been trying to work with various universities in particular to get young people positions for graduate school and to get scholars positions for teaching and to write. And then in the process of that, have learned a lot about the challenges of the immigration system. And so have been directing a lot of advocacy at the State Department because the current consular systems simply don't reflect the needs of our Afghan partners. And so there's a lot of re-traumatizing that's happening for those who are actually able to get out of the country, which remains an incredibly difficult thing to do if they're able to make it to a neighboring country or maybe to Turkey or maybe somewhere in Europe. Even when we are able to get them a full scholarship or a job offer or a fellowship, they're then encountering consular officers who are unconvinced about their intent. And so we're really pushing the State Department with some success, but not systematically yet, to really rethink these categories. Particularly, you can imagine, for a young female professor who's traveling on her own, or a young man who's gotten a full ride to come to get a master's degree in public policy, to then be stuck in another kind of legal and political and social, economic and psychological limbo. And the last thing I'll say is that I remain just in touch, again, in my personal capacity, with a large number of Afghans who are still inside the country, who will probably never get out, and whose futures are really uncertain, and trying to think through with policymakers in Washington, but also with other scholars and other advocates and folks like people on this call, how can we think about maintaining support for and partnership with Afghans in Afghanistan, even as our government tries to think through the very complicated set of decisions about how we're going to engage the new government. So these are all sort of the kinds of questions that we're wrestling with, and for which we need a lot of expertise and support and funding, but also just attention and concern that, like this event.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think one of your comments talking about the psychological re-traumatizing of individuals who come to the United States directly links in with Salim's earlier point. I mean, homesick for 2 years, it's a lot of, it's a really difficult experience to move countries under such circumstances. So Krish, looping to you, since your organization works a lot with resettlement of Afghanis, could you go more into what that's like? And also, I understand your organization has more of a basis in Christianity. So how does that influence your advocacy in the organization's resettlement process?
Yeah, great question. So I'll start with maybe the latter question, because I think it's a little bit easier. So our history is, I think, why you see the Lutheran in our name. So we began in 1939, focusing on the resettlement of Lutheran pastors, professors who were fleeing Nazi Germany and persecution. But that mandate quickly expanded to helping the resettlement of refugees fleeing from Burma, Tibet, Democratic Republic of Congo, Ukraine, and of course, Afghanistan. So we are a 501c3 nonprofit. Proselytizing is not a part of our work. In fact, it legally cannot be. But candidly, it's a great question, and I appreciate it, because when I was approached about this job, I literally deleted the prospectus that the executive search firm sent me, because I thought, oh, I guess they had mistaken me for a Lutheran. But because I am Hindu, I didn't know how I fit into this organization. So I realized that it can seem like a misnomer, and maybe it does our work a disservice. At the same time, candidly, it can be a strength, as we know that immigration is such a politicized issue, that because it is a matter of faith for so many different religions, that I do actually think that the religious history or roots to our work can be an advantage. In terms of the challenges we see with refugee resettlement, I know other panelists have described sort of the legal status of those who are still at risk in Afghanistan, but also for us, we are very focused on how do we help as a policy matter with those who are here on humanitarian parole. And one of our real areas of focus has been trying to get an Afghan Adjustment Act introduced and passed. We know that this would not be an anomaly, because it's actually the tried and true blueprint of how we have addressed previous evacuees, in the three historical instances of when this happened. So it actually would be unprecedented for us to not allow for this adjustment. So that has really been one of the areas of focus that I've had in the last few months, primarily speaking with Republican members of Congress. And I will say, I have not had any resistance. I think mostly the members ask me about some clarifications, and they may have some outstanding questions for the administration on other topics. But really, I think people understand that we made a promise of protection, and that promise doesn't and cannot have an expiration date. And I do think that it relates to what the Bali was talking about in terms of the trauma or the re-traumatization, because I do think that that uncertainty has caused the stress, the sleepless nights that I think Salim so eloquently spoke to. And it has been a major impediment to the successful resettlement of our work. And so this is where, even today I was checking in with my team to kind of see where we need to push. Last week we had a press conference outside of Capitol Hill, just with our veteran colleagues and others, because this is a real focus. But just the two other things I'll mention are housing. Finding safe, affordable housing is one of the biggest challenges we face right now, particularly in places like California. I know that state has been mentioned as obviously a prime location, Northern Virginia. And so, we've been partnering and working hard to identify landlords that we can explain and educate about who Afghan refugees or humanitarian parolees are. We've been working with companies like Airbnb, who've stepped up and provided temporary housing until permanent accommodation can be found. And then the other piece is obviously just making sure that we have the resources, particularly because we serve Afghan unaccompanied minors. I have never seen as much trauma as I've seen with this population, and we have kind of a lot of work with unaccompanied minors coming across the southern border. And I think it just speaks to the trauma that these children have experienced in Afghanistan, in the treacherous journey and uncertainty as they went to the so-called lily pads and then ultimately came to the US. And so this has been a real challenge for us.
Thank you for sharing all of that, Krish. So I'd like to move on to the next segment of the panel before I open it up to questions, starting with Salim. How would you have liked to have been helped when you came to the United States? Like, what were the time-sensitive issues that you faced upon your arrival here?
Thanks for the question. The biggest thing for me was employment. I arrived in a very rough economic time, 2008. Economy wasn't in good shape, so employment for me, besides the issues that I was bringing with myself, such as culture shock and moving from military life to civilian, and working in an environment where people could not understand what I was facing with. For example, when you work in a very high threatful environment and one sudden you move to a country and nobody is thinking like you. In the military, you're always proactive and reactive, and you're very time sensitive, and you're more focused on making accomplishment at your work. And one sudden you come to United States and you work in an entry level labor job, which I just don't want to look down at people who did not serve in such an environment. They were just so different, and they could not had any common ground to work with, because they get paid less money and they're not very focused on their work, and you focus too much at completing your work. So you have people with two different set of values, and that's not the environment for you. Till I got so lucky with my previous co-workers and friends. They helped me to find a job at GRTC, Joint Readiness Training Center for Polk, Louisiana. and I relink with my military society, and I become very thrilled and back to a normal life, and start making a normal income to support myself and support my family back in Afghanistan at that time, and start teaching Afghan culture and awareness and cultural awareness there. And then at the very beginning, I was doing some volunteer work for Tennessee National Guard. That was the first place I arrived in the United States. So bringing these Afghans, as I've been voluntarily helping them, the 01, 02, or the KPF special operation units, I've been finding out from my personal experience that they do not even speak a word of English, and they could not even read and write their native language. And they're not in a young age, such as 17 or 18, to put them in the classes and teach them a quick enough language to adjust with any of working environment and to support themselves. So that would be a more challenge than I was facing, because I was already speaking language and I was younger, and at that time I was single. And those guys, they left their families behind, and they're in mid 30s, most of them, and quite a few of them are in late 20s. So I'm very concerned and worried that somebody should come up with some sort of program to make it easier for them adjusting in this new society.
Thank you for sharing that, Salim. Seema, I saw that you just posted in the chat some of the things that PARS Equality Center needs help with. Do you mind explaining more going into that?
For anybody who would like to look at some pictures while I elaborate, I will share some of these pictures I've taken. So before I start with what the needs are, this is me helping. This is like the setup through all of COVID, and then after and now. It's like we now do face-to-face, but we just continue to work, and this is a humanitarian parole clinic that we led where we're located in Fremont, and this is what we need funding for. Is we have a one-room office, but now we have tons of staff. We have access to these very large conference spaces that we have access to with our lease agreement. So we have every week we have a clinic on Mondays and Wednesdays, and a very large clinic once a month where at least 4 legal representatives come with these volunteer attorneys that you see. And this is an example of one of our clinics that we've done. Here we were helping folks with humanitarian parole applications. But what we need help with is to secure a larger space, because we are already just way too busy, and we need to expand our staff to meet the needs of the community. So this space that you see is where we hold our clinic, but our actual room, which I'll show you, is quite small, where we can, this is a cute picture. This is a picture of, just the first flights that were coming in, where these are my first new arrivals that I met, was a group of 9 family members. And I'm sitting there just outside in the courtyard in Fremont, explaining to them what is their status, what's their next step, how are they going to, what is asylum? And it's always, it's not surprising to me, but most new arrivals, they don't understand the process. And even though folks are trying to gear up to help them, it's just not firing off fast enough. The information and the resources are not reaching folks fast enough. And so what I think is the good thing about PARS is that we don't really wait for people to catch up. We just kind of go on scene and have started this project from the get-go. And this is our tiny little office. And if you know, PARS Equality Center has an office in San Jose and in Los Angeles, and they're very large centers. I'm in San Jose today, but this is Fremont. Fremont, we could only secure this tiny space right now with the funding that we have, but we have a ton of folks. So, and this is Hassan, our new, and a project that I'm doing, I wanted to let you know, is hiring Hassan from the community in Afghan and to raise him up to become an immigration attorney in the community and training him directly and training other Afghan community members to become DOJ accredited reps and serve their own community, is one thing that I'm highly passionate about. And, this is us doing a clinic and the different various volunteers that we have. But our need, I just wanted to say, I've put some links in the chat. We need donations. We need even like folks that have access to like computers, even secondhand computers, because folks that I'm meeting every day, like they are having a hard time. They don't even have a computer, but they need a job. And we actually are passing out even tangible goods like blankets and housewares while we're doing these clinics. And so any like donations, whether they're goods or monetary, and if you don't want to do that, like your presence, like coming to volunteer, even if you're not wanting to do immigration work, you could still check in people, do intakes, make copies, help us run the project, even if it's once a month, every bi-monthly, whatever. And then there's a link that I put a little bit up where Shift Harden is taking like a sponsorship bank. If you want to be a sponsor for a parolee, which means, and if you have a question, what that means, you can email me directly. But it basically we have a lot of unaccompanied minors and individuals who were separated at the airport from their family, and they were mated here, family here, humanitarian parole for their loved ones because they don't have a financial sponsor. If you'd like to help your community, please let me know. Please fill this out. You can put your name in the sponsor bank and then say you want to be joined with Parsa Quality Center, and any other ideas that you may have for us. We're just open to widen our scope.
Thank you, Seema.
Doesn't matter.
No, there's so many things to be done. And I'm sure Krish and Deepali also have additions to that. So Deepali, can you go also describe some of the initiatives and advocacy efforts folks can get involved with, especially with regard to Afghan scholars and students?
Sure, Manal. So I've put in 2 organizations into the chat, the Scholars at Risk Network and the Scholar Rescue Fund, which are doing amazing work connecting scholars with universities. I think to Salim's point, one of the things that folks can do is hire from this remarkable pool of talent. We're talking about some of the best and brightest young people from all over the world are in this population. You can imagine what was involved in being committed to going to school, to going to university, to starting your own business, to creating your own newspaper, to becoming a television commentator or a professor at a university. That's in the midst of decades of conflict, in many cases for Afghan women having lost more than a decade of time in school to catch up and then get to a place to be thriving. I mean, maybe one thing I can do is just pull back a little bit and describe the difference between what Kabul was like when I was there in July and what it would be like now, just to give a little bit of a sense for folks of when you're making a case for asylum or when you're helping people who are trying to secure some sort of status here, what the contrast is. We're talking about a country where the average age is 18 and where young people were in school, in university, as I said, a thriving media space, a thriving private sector and social sector, an incredible cafe scene and an art scene and film scene. And all of that was basically shut down overnight. And for young girls, that meant no more going to school. And for professional women who had been making up a huge portion of the government sector, the public sector, that meant no more work. For journalists, for activists, it's meant being arbitrary detentions, torture in prison, arbitrary executions, and just an incredibly difficult the social space has just collapsed for so many people. And that is why they have taken, as Krish can speak of from her own family's experience, the unimaginable step of leaving everything behind. And from my perspective, for Americans, this is not about being charitable or philanthropic at this point. It's first of all about being responsible in terms of fulfilling our commitments to our partners and those in whom, from whom we asked so much and who invested so much on our behalf. But it's also an extraordinary opportunity to welcome into our society just a remarkable group of people who will contribute immeasurably in every way. And this is the argument we've been making at universities. And I'm really grateful to say that universities have really heard that call. But it's also the argument that needs to be made in the halls of power. And everybody here is in a position to reach out to their members of Congress and to their senators, and then to step up with these incredible organizations that are represented here and volunteer their time and donate their money. Because it's really not about taking pity on people or rescuing or saving them. It's about fulfilling what it means to be partners, and then taking enormous advantage of the gift of talent talent and goodwill that they come with.
Thank you. And to round it out, Krish, can you please elaborate on ways that folks can get involved, especially attorneys who don't have immigration law backgrounds?
Yeah. So I guess maybe I'll speak from the personal experience of being, I don't even know if you'd call me a recovering lawyer, but certainly I think Seema is such a powerful advocate in terms of how the lawyers can get involved from a legal perspective. I think I'll be one of those people of how a lawyer can get involved with other efforts. So as Salim mentioned, I do think that recognizing the employment piece is critically important, because we have to acknowledge that this is not charity, right? It is absolutely the right thing to do. It is absolutely the smart thing to do. And I say this as an employer where our Northern Virginia office has 20 staff, all of whom are Afghan, and the majority of whom are newly arrived Afghans, and they are just incredible. For us, it was the easiest decision in the world because they bring a vast expertise, personal experience, empathy to this work. We know that hiring refugees is a smart business decision for those who are outside of this kind of work of immigration. And so we have tried to make it as easy as possible to encourage employers. So whether you work at a law firm or you work with another employer, or maybe you're an entrepreneur yourself, would love if people took a look at something that we developed in collaboration with the 10 Partnership. So the 10 Partnership is what the Chobani founder, CEO created. So we released something called the U.S. Employer's Guide to Hiring Afghan Refugees. So if you're interested in learning more, and I will put the appropriate email address in, please reach out to my team, because they can match you with the appropriate local resettlement office. I know that there was a question about community-based organizations. So I want to stress that rebuilding the infrastructure has meant that we couldn't just go back to where we were 4 years ago. So we have tried to activate what we call the community co-sponsorship model, because the truth is it shouldn't be just work that's undertaken by Christian organizations or organizations that have a Christian heritage. I know that the African American organizations that we've partnered with, the Muslim American organizations that we've partnered with, they have done this work, and they've done this work for a very long time. And I just think that getting the formal recognition is an important part of how we take this experience and this moment and really build a broader movement. And so one of the things I wanted to mention was we advocated, and thankfully State Department kind of accepted, formally bringing on partnerships with new organizations. And so if you would like to learn more about that, would love to see if there's a way for us to collaborate with community-based organizations. We've done this with the Islamic Society of Delaware, and I would love to explore if there's maybe organizations or people who represent organizations who might want to get involved. You can also, see if there are ways that you as an individual can volunteer. We've had about 100,000 volunteers sign up in the past year, about 50,000 of whom are specifically focused on Afghan resettlement. But we know that this is work that isn't just going to be a matter of the next few weeks or the next few months, but really the next few years at least. And so making sure that we have kind of that stable of support so that we have the mentors to partner with the families that we're working with, I think is going to be critically important. And then just the final piece I'll note is, on the advocacy front, whether it is supporting what Polly has described of continuing the cause and the advocacy for Afghans who remain at risk, whether it is making sure that the State Department doesn't just rely on Qatar to be a proxy for issues, especially around women and girls empowerment. I think it's really important that people hear that though Afghanistan has not kind of been front and center in the same way that it was in August, that it is still on our radar. I think it's really important that our political leaders be aware. So, would love if people signed up for LIRS, our action alerts, because on a regular basis, whether it's the Afghan Adjustment Act that we're trying to get across the finish line or other efforts, we'd love to stay in touch, and I'll put my contact information in the inbox as well.
All right, thank you so much. So the only question that I think we have time for before we have to sadly conclude this panel is it's from one of the audience members, and it reads, "There were numerous images of babies and children being passed to soldiers during the evacuation efforts. Where are those children now? Are there any that are still housed at lily pad country or at one of the bases in the US? How can we help them?" So if any of the panelists know the answer to that question, please jump on in.
Yeah, so I can jump in because we do, as I mentioned, have some Afghan unaccompanied minors who are in our care. So just to give you context, so like the children that we work with who come across the southern border, there has been, not the exact same dynamic, but a similar dynamic where 75% roughly do have a parent or guardian who is here in the US. And so our foremost concern is trying to reunify those children with their parent or guardian who are here in the US. But there are some number of Afghan children who are here, but their parents or extended family are in a third country, the so-called lily pads, or in Afghanistan. And so we are working kind of in a kind of a dual respect. So one piece of this is to make sure that we can reunify the children by having their parent or guardian be able to come to the US. But the second piece is making sure that for the time that they are here and in the custody and care, that we provide the best service we can to these children. As I said, trauma is a significant issue with the children that we've been serving. Making sure that the care is culturally sensitive is incredibly important. Just candidly, the trouble we have had, and this has been a real focus of mine, is that many of the foster care parents that we have as part of our network, do not come from Muslim backgrounds, do not come from the Afghan community. And so trying to figure out how we use the traditional network that already exists, but partnering with those who come from the community so they can serve as mentors has been important. It has not been easy, but that has been one of our focus areas.
All right, thank you so much, Krish, for answering that question. So that concludes the majority of the panel. Do any of the panelists have any final comments they want to say before we wrap things up? Salim?
Yes, I would like to mention some of the most priorities for the new arrivals. since they come from a male-dominant society, and we all know that Afghanistan has been in a war for over 40 years, and unfortunately, anytime if there was any democratic move or building Afghanistan, the outsiders used the extremist version of religion to stop and sabotage that. So Afghan society or the people who are new arrivals, they're more not very familiar with a normal civilized life as luckily we have here in America. So that would be a nice idea if wherever we have those big gatherings and meetings to convey my message, to teach them more about how differences of a male-dominant society versus a normal civilized society here in America. And especially for the ones who are not speaking the English language, because it will be hard for them to educate and adjust themselves with this new life here in America. And that can be a challenging for them to get approved, because I've been hearing that they are on 2 years a visa or some other sort of documents if they're having any violation of law or a human rights or some other stuff that can easily make them ineligible and kick them out of the country. So and also for the females, since they lived in a very close-minded society, and as we know here in America, we did not become a civilized nation in one night or one day. It took us so many years, especially if we go back to the history of World War II. It was more of a male dominance here as well. But in World War II, all the men were deployed. So females come out and participated in many different fields, like construction, running business. Besides just teaching in the school, they took over medical and other things too. So that would be a very helpful information to share with them, especially for the ones who are not speaking the language. That's my biggest thing to share with the new arrivals.
All right, thank you so much. So holding on, if there are any more comments, please jump in. Otherwise, I think that concludes our panel. Thank you so much to all of the panelists for your astute comments, great points of advocacy and ways to help. I believe there's a lot of contact information being shared in the panel, but I'm going to stop the recording now, and thank you all so much again.
Thank you.